Galactic Empire expanded relentlessly, swallowing star systems and dissolving resistance with brutal efficiency. Their fleets blazed across the skies of countless worlds, their ground forces stamping out uprisings before they had time to grow. The galaxy's powers watched this dominance unfold and accepted the Empire's rule as inevitable. Among the species under their boot, humans were barely considered worth notice. The Empire categorized them as strategically irrelevant, primitive, disjointed, incapable of posing any real threat. This belief hardened over generations of imperial victories. Humans became a footnote in the grand narrative of the Empire's rise, a race best left to occupy fringe worlds while core civilizations thrived. When the Empire turned its attention to the human colony of Astor's Reach, no one expected resistance. The colony was a peaceful settlement, a civilian hub with minimal defenses, a place where farmers, scientists, and families had built quiet lives. The attack came without warning. Imperial fleets descended and unleashed devastation. No demands, no offers of surrender. They glassed the surface. Entire generations vaporized. Children, the elderly, the infirm, all exterminated as a demonstration of imperial power. It was not a battle. It was an execution. The Empire transmitted the footage across the galactic network, making it clear that this would be the fate of any species that disrespected their rule. It was a message meant to terrify. The galaxy heard it and remained silent. No species intervened. No protests rose from the galactic councils. Fear of the Empire's reprisal silenced even the most morally outraged. Some species quietly applauded the decisive action, grateful to see the humans humiliated and reminded of their place. Others simply turned away, not willing to risk their own security for a race considered insignificant. The massacre passed into record as another imperial operation, another system subdued. Among humans, shock turned into grief, and grief into rage. The scattered remnants of human colonies cried out for retribution, but Earth's governments and the outposts in nearby systems were divided. Political factions argued over the best course of action. Some pleaded for peace, others demanded immediate war. Resources were thin. Human fleets were small, outdated, and fractured across distant sectors. There was no unified human defense force capable of facing the Empire. Even the most hawkish leaders feared the annihilation that would surely follow an open declaration of war. The prevailing sentiment was grim. Humanity could not win. But in the whispers of the surviving captains and in the encrypted networks of old soldiers, a name surfaced repeatedly. A name that lingered like a ghost from humanity's bloodiest campaigns. General Anne. She had been absent from the galactic stage for years, retired, disappeared, her whereabouts unknown. Among humans, her legend persisted as a tactician who once turned an impossible war into a human victory. Among the older alien strategists, her name carried weight, a shadow they preferred not to acknowledge. Some believed she was dead. Others believed she had walked away, disgusted by the politics that shackle human potential. But in the wake of the Astor's Reach massacre, voices began to rise. Find Anne. She was the one who could fight the Empire. She was the one who had seen the map of the galaxy not as territory to defend, but as a weapon to wield. For years, it had been an echo buried under bureaucracy and fear, but now the call returned with urgency. Human intelligence operatives, surviving naval officers, and resistance cells scoured the furthest reaches of charted space. They unearthed old logs, abandoned bases, encrypted transmissions left untouched for decades. The search became a quiet obsession. They tracked whispers to backwater planets, deep space mining stations, and even into the dead zones beyond the edge of imperial star charts. Every fragment of information pointed to a single conclusion: General N was alive. The Empire, unaware of the quiet storm brewing, continued its campaign against other species. They fortified their new holdings in human space, confident that no credible retaliation would come. The fleet stationed in the conquered sectors grew complacent, believing the humans broken, their spirit crushed beneath imperial might. They did not see the networks of human operatives weaving together across the stars, did not detect the coded messages passing between distant outposts. As the search continued, old human warships were quietly recommissioned, rusted hulls pulled from forgotten shipyards, obsolete weapons recalibrated, crews of volunteers, deserters, and survivors began assembling in the shadows. The old war protocols were reactivated, dormant security codes verified. Still, it wasn't enough. Without end, these scattered pieces were nothing but relics in the path of an unstoppable machine. When they finally found her, she was far from where they expected, living under an assumed name, on a derelict station, orbiting a gas giant in a sector few dare to enter. The officer who found her didn't bring an army, only a simple message. They killed them. Innocents, children, and the galaxy watched. Humanity is calling you back. She listened in silence, her face unreadable, then asked one question. Who stood against them? The officer's answer, no one. That was enough. And returned, not with speeches or grand declarations, but with demands. She would have total command. No oversight. No political interference. She would not wage a conventional war. She would not accept half measures or diplomatic constraints. Humanity would either be victorious or obliterated. Those were her terms. The desperate remnants of human leadership agreed. They had no other choice. The preparations began immediately and assembled the scattered fleets under her banner, consolidating them into specialized task forces. She scoured the forgotten playbooks of ancient human warfare and combined them with brutal, physics-defying strategies the Empire had never faced. She revived doctrines abandoned for being too reckless, too costly, too dangerous. She demanded loyalty, efficiency, and absolute execution of orders. Her presence alone reignited the fractured human factions, welding them together under a singular, terrifying purpose. She studied the Empire's movements, their logistics, their command hierarchy. She exploited the arrogance that had settled into their ranks. She planned not to match the Empire's strength, but to tear apart their support structures, to shatter their illusions of control. She would not fight them where they expected. She would strike where they believed themselves untouchable. While the human fleets moved into position and intelligence networks infiltrated imperial communication lines, she gathered data on their fleet compositions, their patrol routes, and most importantly, their complacency. The Empire had not anticipated that humans would respond with such precision, such cold calculation. They believed the massacre would demoralize the humans into submission. Instead, it forged them into weapons. The first coordinated strikes under N's command were small, surgical. Outposts went dark. Convoys vanished. Imperial captains dismissed them as accidents, pirates, internal malfunctions. But the pattern grew. Supply lines were severed. General N's return shattered the fragile balance of fear that had kept humanity subdued. Her demands had been absolute, and the human factions, desperate for survival, had granted her full autonomy. She wasted no time. She began the mobilization with brutal efficiency, pulling scattered human resources into a unified war machine. Under her command, no piece was insignificant, no ship obsolete. What others discarded, she weaponized. What others feared, she mastered. She did not seek parity with the Empire. She intended to exploit its weight, to collapse its own mass upon itself. Human manufacturing centers roared back to life under N's strict direction. Outdated hulls were stripped, reinforced, and loaded with improvised technologies designed to exploit specific imperial weaknesses. Entire fleets were assembled from ships deemed unfit for modern warfare, and made them lethal. She devised new fleet formations that could fracture and reassemble fluidly, confusing imperial targeting systems. She trained her crews relentlessly, demanding absolute precision in chaotic conditions. She ordered engineers to reprogram the navigation protocols to operate in gravitational edges, stellar storms, and high radiation sectors where the Empire's ships dared not follow. Anne's intelligence networks expanded deep into Imperial territory. Human operatives infiltrated trade hubs, supply depots, and communication nodes, feeding her a constant stream of updates. She identified weaknesses in the Empire's logistics chains and meticulously mapped every vulnerable star lane. She understood the Empire's psychology. They did not respect humans. They expected rebellion to be emotional, desperate, unsophisticated, and gave them cold, methodical terror instead. The first wave of human counterattacks struck with surgical precision and did not launch full-scale battles. She targeted critical resupply stations, fuel convoys, and isolated garrisons. Her fleets would appear, execute devastating strikes, and vanish into gravitational shadows. The Empire's forces scrambled to react but found themselves chasing phantoms. Human ships moved unpredictably, using outdated stellar charts to navigate paths dismissed as suicidal. Imperial commanders reported the impossible. Human vessels traversing collapsing wormholes, operating inside unstable nebulae, exploiting black hole proximities as tactical shields. Each strike was a message. Humanity would not fight the war the Empire wanted. Imperial analysts struggled to understand the pattern, and operations appeared random until the supply failures began to cascade. Imperial fleets found themselves stranded, their logistics chains severed. Key shipyards went silent. Reinforcements never arrived. Human forces began to intercept and alter Imperial communication relays, feeding disinformation that redirected entire flotillas into ambushes or dead sectors. The Empire initially dismissed these losses as anomalies. Their command structure remained convinced that overwhelming force would eventually corner the human insurgents. They failed to grasp that and had no intention of holding territory. She only needed to inflict sustained, asymmetric damage. She forced the Empire into exhaustion. The Imperial war doctrine, built on mass deployment and centralized logistics, could not adapt to this relentless war disruption, and forces escalated. She deployed hunter-killer groups that specifically targeted Imperial admirals and command ships. She authorized high-risk boarding operations where human marines would storm enemy flagships, assassinate leadership, and leave the vessels adrift. Imperial fleets began to fracture under the weight of decapitated command chains. Panic spread among the mid-level officers who now faced human fleets that moved with surgical aggression. Human weapons defied the expectations of their enemies. Anne's engineers converted asteroid fields into mobile minefields, rigged with proximity triggers that only human ships could bypass. They turned the debris from destroyed Imperial vessels into high-velocity kinetic projectiles. Human boarding pods were retrofitted with magnetic disruptors that disabled internal gravity in enemy ships, turning corridors into lethal battlegrounds where human soldiers thrived. Imperial crews faced nightmares they had never trained for. They faced humans who fought as if they had already accepted death, and doctrine spread like wildfire through human space. Independent captains aligned with her strategy, mimicking her tactics and amplifying her reach. Entire sectors became kill zones where the Empire's traditional superiority was rendered irrelevant. The psychological impact on the Empire was catastrophic. They had never faced an enemy that used the galaxy itself as a weapon. Alien species across the galaxy began to notice. Empires that had remained neutral now monitored human communications closely. Merchant guilds started rerouting their trade routes to avoid Imperial control systems, fearing human interdiction. Mercenary fleets previously employed by the Empire hesitated to accept contracts against human targets. Anne's campaign had altered the galactic perception of human strength. They were no longer seen as a scattered, irrelevant species. They were predators with no interest in diplomacy, no desire for mercy, and no tolerance for imperial authority, and continued to escalate. She unleashed portable gravity well generators that could temporarily collapse local star lanes, stranding imperial fleets and cutting them off from retreat. She authorized the deployment of plasma destabilizers that turn entire asteroid belts into volatile firestorms. Imperial attempts to adapt were met with swift countermeasures. Their heavy cruisers, designed for fleet engagements, found themselves vulnerable in the gravity-crippled kill zones where human light ships could maneuver with impunity. Every Imperial response played into Anne's design. She predicted their counteroffensives, their attempt to fortify key systems, their desperation to re-establish supply lines. She set traps at the fringes of Imperial control, baiting them into overextending. Imperial task forces sent to crush isolated human outposts found themselves systematically encircled, their exit paths sealed by gravity mines, their long-range support neutralized by human strike groups operating in electromagnetic blind zones. And campaign destabilized entire regions. Imperial governors requested emergency reinforcements, but the central command structure was already stretched thin. The Empire's high command realized they were fighting a war they no longer controlled. They attempted to shift to brutal reprisal tactics, targeting civilian populations to force the humans into submission. But Anne had anticipated this. She relocated key civilian clusters into mobile fleets, hiding them deep within uncharted sectors, protected by fleets operating on ghost protocols. When Imperial strike groups arrived at human colonies, they found only empty cities or heavily armed decoys that detonated upon approach. Human propaganda turned the Empire's failure into a weapon. Messages intercepted across the galaxy broadcast Imperial defeats and human victories. Alien species, long silent, began to reconsider their alliances. Minor species offered limited support to human fleets, supplying navigational data and low-level logistics, and did not trust them. She accepted their assistance, but maintained strict human operational independence.